The wagon wheels had been grinding through mud since before dawn, and Eli Calloway had not spoken a word in 2 hours. That suited Maren Voss just fine. She sat on the bench beside him with her hands folded in her lap and watched the land open up ahead of them, flat and pale and enormous under a sky the color of old pewter. She had never been this far west. She had not known, until this morning, that the world could be so empty and still feel so full of eyes. Holt's Crossing, Wyoming Territory, September 1883. She had read the name on a letter 3 times before accepting it was real. A town that needed a schoolteacher, a school board chairman who had signed the contract without meeting her, because no one else had applied. The salary was modest. The lodging would be a room above the dry goods store. She had told herself it was an opportunity. She had not been told about the hanging. Not directly, but the woman at the relay station in Casper, the one who had taken one look at Maren and asked where she was headed, had gone quiet in a particular way when Maren said Holt's Crossing. She had refilled the tin cup without being asked and mentioned only that it had been a difficult summer for that town. Eli Calloway, the man the school board had sent to fetch her, had said nothing about it either. He was somewhere past 50, lean and weathered, with the kind of face that decades of outdoor work had shaped. He had taken her trunk without being asked and loaded it himself and handed her up to the bench with a courtesy that felt courtly and genuine. But he had not offered conversation, and she had not forced it. Now she asked what had happened here this summer. It was not a question. Quite, she said it the way you say a thing when you already know the shape of it and are only asking someone to fill it in. Eli did not answer immediately. He watched the road ahead. The horses moved steadily through the mud. Then he spoke. A man named Decker was shot. You will hear about it. Better you hear it plain than sideways. She waited. Decker owned the mill, owned a good share of the grazing rights north of the creek. He was not a man you crossed lightly, and somebody crossed him anyway. Shot him outside the saloon in July. 3 men saw it happen. And they caught who did it, she said. They caught a man named Thomas Birch. He worked a small piece of ground east of town. Did some carpentry in the off-season. Nobody cared about much. She heard something careful in how he said it. Was it him? Eli was quiet for a moment. His hands stayed loose on the reins. Thomas Birch did not shoot Garrett Decker. I know that because I was standing 20 feet away when it happened, and the man I saw was not Thomas Birch. She turned and looked at him for the first time since they had left the relay station. I testified to that at the inquest. Said it plain. Said I could not swear it was Birch, because the man I saw was wearing a hat pulled low and moving fast, and I could not make a positive identification. The 3 witnesses who said it was Birch, 2 of them worked for Decker, and 1 of them owed him money. I said that too. He paused. A crow crossed the road ahead of them, and the horses did not startle. They did not hang Birch in the end. The circuit judge had doubts, but the town did not like my testimony. And here I am still. So now you know. She sat with that for a while. Why are you still here? I was born here. My father broke this ground. I am not going to let a town full of grieving, frightened people run me off of my own land because I told the truth at an inquest. He said it without heat. That was what struck her. He stated it the way you state a fact about the weather, flat and certain and done with. She looked back at the road ahead, at the pale grass stretching out on either side, at the first shapes of buildings appearing in the far distance like a sentence starting. She thought, I have come to a place that tried to hang an innocent man and resents the one person who tried to stop it. She thought, well, I signed the contract. The schoolroom was cold and smelled of disuse. 2 of the windows had cracked panes covered with oil paper, which did the work poorly. The desks were mismatched in size, salvaged from different places, and the stove in the corner was functional but sulky, requiring a particular coaxing to draw properly. Maren spent the first afternoon learning its habits. She got it drawn by supper. There were 11 children enrolled. She met them the following Monday morning. They came in quietly, most of them, which was not the quiet of good behavior, but the quiet of children who had been told to watch themselves around the new person. A few of them looked at her with the direct, measuring gaze of children who had been discussing her. A boy named Calvin Rood, 11 years old, and carrying the confidence of someone who had decided opinions, raised his hand before she had finished writing her name on the board. "My father says you came on Eli Calloway's wagon." She turned from the board. "That is correct. Mr. Calloway was kind enough to collect me from the relay station." Calvin Rood kept his chin up. "My father says Calloway is a liar." She looked at the boy for a moment, not at the chin, at the eyes, which were carrying something heavier than a boy his age should have to carry. "Your father is entitled to his opinion. In this room, we concern ourselves with what we can demonstrate to be true. Do you understand the difference between an opinion and a demonstrated fact?" He did not answer, which was itself an answer. "Good, then we will get along fine." She set the chalk down and picked up the primer, and they began. The room above the dry goods store was small but clean. A bed, a washstand, a table, 2 chairs, a window overlooking the main street. The store below was run by a woman named Agnes Purdy, who was compact and practical, and handed Marin a key the first morning with the air of someone who had made a decision and was not going to explain it. Marin thanked her. Agnes set a second key on the counter beside the first, as though the matter of gratitude was beside the point. "You will find that the town is divided into people who are polite to you and people who are not. It will have nothing to do with you personally. Do not take it to heart." "Because of Mr. Calloway," Marin said. Agnes met her eyes. "Because of Mr. Calloway." Marin looked at her. "Were you one of the people who wanted to hang Thomas Birch?" Agnes set a jar of preserves on the counter and studied it for a moment, as if the answer were written on the lid. "I was one of the people who was not certain, which is almost worse. I did not speak up. I sat in that inquest and I thought, what do I know? And I kept quiet. And Eli Calloway stood up and said what he saw, and what he did not see, and what the witnesses were likely motivated by, and the judge listened, and Thomas Birch went home to his wife. And the town has been sore about it ever since, which tells you something about the town." She pushed the preserves across the counter. "Plum from my own trees. You will want something good with your bread." Marin took the jar. "You are being kind to me because you think I might be kind to Mr. Calloway." Agnes almost smiled. "I am being kind to you because you are new here, and it costs me nothing. What you do with it is your own business." Eli Calloway's land sat east of town, and the road to it was in poor repair in a way that felt deliberate. The creek crossing had a plank missing from the bridge that had apparently been missing since July. His fence line along the east road had been cut twice and repaired twice, and you could see where the new wire had been spliced in if you were looking for it. Marin was not looking for it the first time she passed. She was carrying a note from the school board about the second window, asking if Eli knew of anyone who could reglaze it. Agnes had told her with a careful neutrality that Eli Calloway had done the glazing on the original windows 3 years ago. She walked out on a Saturday morning and knocked at his door. He opened it and looked at her for a moment. "Miss Voss." "Mr. Calloway." She held out the school board note. "I apologize for coming without sending word ahead. The school board asked me to find someone to repair the window in the schoolroom. Agnes Purdy thought you might be able to help." A pause, brief and considering. Agnes Purdy is fond of a useful suggestion. He stepped back from the door. She understood this to be an invitation. The kitchen was plain and clean. A fire going on the stove, coffee on. A slate board propped on the table with a column of figures on it. The kind of careful accounting a man does when he is not sure whether the numbers will come out in his favor. He poured 2 cups without asking and set one in front of the second chair. She sat down. She looked at the slate and asked if she might. He nodded. The figures were calculations for feed costs against his expected income from the fall grain sale, and the margin was thin, painfully thin. She had grown up watching her father do exactly this kind of arithmetic on the edge of a bad season, and she recognized the shape of it. She turned the slate and pointed to the third line. You have the feed cost for the horses listed as a fixed monthly amount, but if you carry them through to November on pasture before you bring them into hay, you cut that number by about a third. Is the pasture still good enough in October? He looked at where she was pointing. Usually, it was this year. Then you have about $14 more than you think you do. He was quiet for a moment. He picked up the slate and studied the line she had indicated. Something shifted in his posture, not relief exactly, but the particular adjustment of a man who has been bracing for worse than he got. My wife used to do the books. I am sorry, Marin said, 3 years ago. It was her heart. She nodded. She did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that he had not already lived with for 3 years. He set the slate down. How did you come to know feed calculations? My father ran 60 head of cattle in Minnesota for 12 years before the market took his legs out from under him. I helped with the books from the time I was old enough to add. And then you became a teacher. And then my father died, and there was nothing to go back to. And I had the certification already, and here I am. He looked at her, not the assessing, guarded look he had given her on the wagon, but something more direct. Here you are. She drank her coffee. I will take the school board note, Mr. Calloway. I will come Thursday afternoon if that suits. She told him it did, and walked back to town in the pale October light, thinking about the slate on the table and the careful column of figures and the way he had said, "Here you are," as if it meant something particular. The glazing took most of Thursday afternoon. Eli worked without hurry and without conversation, and Marin corrected papers at her desk while the children were gone. And it was easy in the way that things are easy when neither person is performing anything. At one point she looked up, and he was looking at one of the drawings pinned to the wall. One of the children, a girl named Rosa Hines, had drawn a map of the territory in colored chalk on paper. And it was remarkably good. Who did this? Rosa Hines, Marin told him. She is 8. She has got the creek drainage exactly right. She told me she has walked most of it with her grandfather. He turned back to the window. I know her grandfather. He homesteaded out past my east fence line 20 years ago. Good man. He pressed the putty knife along the frame. Rosa Hines is one of the children who does not look at me sideways when I come into the feed store. Marin set her pen down. Children are less invested in the story the town has told itself about you. Most of them. Calvin Root is the exception. Eli was quiet for a moment. Calvin Root is his father made young. His father was one of the witnesses who identified Birch. There was silence. She thought about that. Thought about what it costs a child to carry a father's lie around in his chest. I will keep an eye on him, Marin said. Eli looked at her. Something shifted slightly in his face, as though he had not expected that. He turned back to the window and pressed the new pane into the glazing compound with steady, practiced hands. You did not have to say that. I know. The first serious cold came in November, and with it came a man named Orrin Decker, the dead mill owner's brother, who had arrived in Holt's Crossing from Laramie 2 weeks after the shooting and had been living in the Decker house on the north side of town ever since, managing the estate, managing the mill, managing the impression that the Decker family had suffered a great wrong, and that wrong had not been properly addressed. Marin had seen him a handful of times from a distance. He was carefully dressed in a way that felt studied, a man who had spent money on the appearance of substance. He had a way of standing in the center of a room that suggested he expected the room to accommodate him. She was at Agnes Purdy's store buying lamp oil when Orrin Decker came in. He did not speak to her directly. He came in, bought tobacco, spoke to Agnes about a delivery he was expecting, and then, while Agnes was writing it down, he remarked to no one in particular that he had heard the new schoolteacher was friendly with Calloway. Marin kept her eyes on the jar of lamp oil in her hands. Agnes did not look up from her ledger. I imagine the new schoolteacher is friendly with a good number of people in town. Orrin it is her job to be. Just noting it. People make their associations. Associations say something. Marin set the lamp oil on the counter. Mr. Decker, he looked at her. He had not expected her to speak directly to him. She could see that. I came here to teach school. I have taught 11 children their letters and their numbers and their geography for 6 weeks now, and I intend to keep doing that. I choose my associations based on the character of the people involved, and I am satisfied with the choices I have made. I do not believe I owe you a further accounting of them. She picked up the lamp oil. Good afternoon. She walked out of the store and stood on the porch for a moment in the cold air and let her hands stop trembling. Agnes appeared in the doorway behind her, arms folded against the chill. That was well done. It did not feel well done. It felt terrifying. Agnes nodded, matter of fact. That is usually how you can tell. Orrin Decker moved quickly after that, which told Marin he had been planning to move quickly all along, and she had only unsettled his timing slightly. Within 2 weeks, a petition appeared. She heard about it from Agnes, who had heard about it from 3 different people in the same afternoon. The petition requested a formal review of the school board's decision to hire Marin Voss, on the grounds that a teacher in the moral center of the community should not have associations that undermined public trust. It named Eli Calloway specifically. The school board meeting was held on a Friday evening in December. It was the kind of cold that settled into buildings and stayed. The community hall had a fire going, but the room was still cold at the edges. And Marin stood at the front of it and looked at the people who had come, and counted. 12 people in favor of the petition. She recognized most of them. She recognized the 2 former Decker employees who had been witnesses at the inquest. She recognized Calvin Rood's father, who sat in the second row with his arms crossed and his chin set. She counted the others: Agnes Purdy, old Henry Hines, Rosa's grandfather, who had walked in from his place in the cold and sat in the front row with his hat in his lap, the circuit minister, who had not signed the petition and had sent word he would be present, 3 families she knew less well, who had children in the schoolroom, and who had come in quietly and sat together. And in the back, near the door, Eli Calloway. He had not told her he was coming. She had not known to expect him. He stood with his back to the wall and his hat in his hands, and he did not look at the crowd. He looked at her. The school board chairman, a man named Fowler, read the petition aloud. He had the look of someone who had not wanted any of this and had not been able to stop it. Orrin Decker spoke first. He was smooth and measured. The question was not personal, he said. The question was what kind of example a public educator set for the children of the community. Associations with a man who had disrupted the community's process of grieving and justice were not associations befitting someone entrusted with the town's youth. Marin waited. Fowler turned to her. Miss Voss, you may speak. She stepped forward. I want to address what Mr. Decker called a disruption of justice. Eli Calloway stood in front of a judge and said what he saw and what he did not see. That is not a disruption of justice. That is what justice requires. Thomas Birch went home to his wife because one man in this town was willing to say plainly that he could not in good conscience confirm what 3 interested witnesses said they saw. She looked at the room. I have been here 6 weeks. In that time, I have taught 11 children. I have repaired 2 windows, sorted out a stove that was not drawing, and replaced the primers on 4 of the desks because the old ones were falling apart. I have done this work to the best of my ability, and I intend to keep doing it. The character of the people I choose to spend time with is not the school board's concern unless it affects my work in that schoolroom. It does not. The children are learning. They are happy. Several of them are measurably ahead of where they were in September. She paused. If you choose to end my contract over this, I will accept that. But I want it noted in this room that what you would be ending it over is not my conduct as a teacher. You would be ending it because I did not treat a man badly when the town wanted me to. And I think you should have to say that out loud. The room was quiet. Then Henry Hines spoke from the front row, still seated, hat in his lap. I have known Eli Calloway for 22 years. He does not lie. I know that because I have tested it more than once, and he has never told me what I wanted to hear when the truth was different. I would rather have one honest man in this town than 10 comfortable ones. Fowler looked at the petition. He looked at the room. I am going to suggest we table this matter and revisit it in the new year. Orrin Decker started to speak, but 3 of the people in the room were already standing to leave, and 2 more followed, and the weight of the room had shifted in a way that everyone could feel, and Decker sat back. After, Marin stood outside in the cold and watched people cross the street toward the saloon or their homes. The sky was clear and full of stars, and the cold was serious now, the kind that settled in for months. Eli came out after most of the others had gone. He stood beside her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The stars were very bright, and the main street was nearly empty, and somewhere down the block, a horse stamped once against the cold. You did not have to do any of that. Yes, I did. He looked at the street. Marin. It was the first time he had used her given name. She noticed it the way you notice a door opening in a wall you thought was solid. I want to say something. I have been trying to work out how to say it for about 3 weeks. Say it plain. You are good at plain. He drew a slow breath. I have been alone for 3 years. I have gotten accustomed to it in the way you get accustomed to cold. You stop noticing how much you have shut down to accommodate it. And then you sit down at my table, and you look at my numbers and you tell me I have $14 more than I thought, and I have not been accustomed to that feeling since my wife was alive. He stopped. The street was empty now. A lantern was burning in the window of the general store, throwing a yellow square of light onto the snow. I am not a man who has things to offer that look impressive. I have a piece of land that is not paid off, and a reputation in this town that is the opposite of an asset, and a habit of saying things people do not want to hear. Those are the facts. I know the facts, she said. I am asking if you would consider being courted. The cold settled around them. The lantern in the store window held its light. I signed a 1-year contract with this school board. I know. A year is a reasonable amount of time. Yes, ask me again in the spring, Eli. He looked at her. Something in his face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory. I will be asking in March. I know, she said. She went inside, and the cold came with her for just a moment, and then the door was closed and the room above the store was warm from the stove she had banked before she left. And she stood in it for a while, without lighting the lamp. December turned, and January came in hard. The creek froze over. The road to Eli's property was worse for it, but she walked it anyway on Saturdays. There was always something that wanted doing. A broken stair on the porch. A door that had swollen in the cold and needed planing. She was not much use for carpentry, but she was useful for holding things level, for handing him what he needed, for keeping the coffee hot. They talked more now. She told him about Minnesota, about her father, about the year after her father died when she had taken the certification examination twice because she had failed it the first time and that had not been allowed to be the end of it. He told her about the piece of ground his father had broken, about the first winter when they had nearly lost everything to a hard freeze, about his wife Ruth, who had had a laugh that you could hear from the barn. Ruth had laughed at him constantly, in the best way. She had never let him take himself too seriously. That sounds like a gift, Marin said. It was. He was quiet for a moment. I did not know how much of a gift until it was gone. She thought about that. Outside the window, the snow was coming down in the slow, patient way it came down in January, as though it had nowhere to be. I have not been laughed at nearly enough, she said. I was always the serious one. I have noticed. You are not supposed to agree with that. You are the one who asked for plain. She looked at him across the table. Eli Calloway. Ma'am. And she laughed. It surprised her. It came out of somewhere she had not known was available, a genuine, unguarded laugh, and she put her hand over her mouth, and he looked pleased in the careful, private way he had of being pleased. There it is. There what is. I have been waiting to hear that. She took her hand down from her mouth. "You have not been waiting that long." "Long enough," he said. And the words settled between them with the quiet certainty of a thing that was simply true. The petition was never revisited. Fowler let it die quietly in January, which was about as close to a public verdict as the town was likely to manage. Orrin Decker left Holt's Crossing in February to return to Laramie, the estate business apparently settled to whatever degree it was going to be settled. He did not say goodbye to anyone that Marin heard of. Calvin Rood came to school on a Thursday in February and sat down at his desk and opened his primer without any of the performance he usually needed. Marin noticed it and said nothing. At the end of the day, she asked him to wait a moment. "You have been working hard this week." He looked at the desk. His jaw worked the way a boy's jaw works when he is deciding how much to say. "My mother told my father that a man who tells the truth at an inquest is not a bad man." She kept at it until he stopped arguing. "Your mother sounds sensible," Marin said. "She is. She told me I should work harder in school." He said it with the blunt pragmatism of a child who has received instruction and is carrying it out without necessarily understanding all of it yet. That is good advice. He looked up. "Is it true that Mr. Calloway is fixing up the schoolhouse porch this spring?" "I believe that is the plan. My father knows how to mend fences. He is pretty good at it. He might be able to help." She looked at the boy for a moment, at the careful way he held himself, at the small, sideways nature of the offering. I will mention that. The lantern on her windowsill had been there since October. Agnes Purdy had given it to her the first week. A small pressed tin thing with a glass panel, and Marin had put it in the window out of habit. The way you light a window in a place where people travel at night and might need to know where a warm room is. She had lit it every evening she was home, not thinking much about it. She thought about it in March. She thought about the first time Eli had come up the road after dark to tell her the creek bridge had washed out in the thaw, and he would come to town Saturday instead. He had seen the lantern in the window from the road. He had known she was home. She thought about Ruth, who had laughed at him from the barn. She thought about Minnesota and the certification examination she had failed once and taken again. She thought about standing in the cold outside the community hall and saying, "I want it noted in this room." March came in with wind and mud, and the first smell of something living underneath the cold. On a Saturday morning, early, before she had finished her first cup of coffee, there was a knock at the door below, and Agnes called up that there was someone for her. Eli was standing in the doorway of the store with his hat in his hands and mud on his boots, and the look of a man who has thought through what he is going to say and is now not certain any of it is adequate. "You said March." "It is March." "So it is. I asked you in December if you would consider being courted. You said to ask again in spring." He left the sentence where it was. She looked at him. The morning light was coming through the front window of the store and landing on the jars on Agnes's shelves, and somewhere upstairs she could hear Agnes finding things to do loudly and deliberately in the back room. "I have been considering it since December, Eli, and I have considered it thoroughly." "Marin." "Yes," he stood there for a moment with the hat in his hands. "I was not sure you would." "I know. That is the part I am going to have to work on with you. You have spent too long being sure of the worst." He looked at her steadily. "You might be right about that. I am usually right about that kind of thing." Agnes appeared from the back room with entirely too much speed for someone who had not been listening, smoothing her apron with great purpose. "I will put coffee on." Summer came slowly, and then all at once, the way summer does in Wyoming territory. The children finished their term in June. Rosa Hines gave Marin a drawing of the schoolhouse as a gift. Calvin Rood shook her hand on the last day with the grave formality of a boy who had decided something about himself over the course of the winter and was still working out what it meant. The porch on the schoolhouse got fixed. Calvin Rood's father came on the second Saturday with 2 good planks and a box of nails and worked alongside Eli without speaking much, and then allowed at the end of it that the work looked solid. Eli agreed that it did. That was the closest either of them was likely to come to a different kind of conversation, and both of them seemed to understand that. On a Thursday evening in July, Marin sat on the steps of Eli's porch in the long summer light and watched the horses move in the pasture and thought about the year that had passed. She had a letter in her pocket from the school board renewing her contract for a second year. She had already decided to accept it. Eli came out of the house and sat down beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, which was something they had gotten good at. "There is something I want to ask you." "Ask it." He was quiet for a moment, watching the horses. "I have been thinking about something Ruth told me once. A man who knows how to be alone is not the same as a man who ought to be." "She sounds like she was right about most things," Marin said. "She was." He was quiet for another moment. The light was very long and gold on the grass. "I am not going to be alone anymore, Marin, if you are willing. I mean for the rest of it, not just the season." She looked at the pasture. The horses were moving in that slow, contented way horses move when nothing is required of them. "I signed a second year with the school board. I know, the school is not far. I know the road. You have been walking it since October." "I have." She turned and looked at him. This man who had stood up in a room full of people, who wanted him to sit down and said what he saw and what he did not see and what he would not swear to. This man who had come to fetch a stranger from a relay station and handled the trunk himself and handed her up to the bench with a courtesy she had not forgotten. "I am willing, Eli." The lantern was still in the window that night when she walked home, because she had forgotten to put it out in the morning. She could see it from the road, the small pressed tin light burning in the glass. She had come to this place not knowing what was here. She had found a cold schoolroom and a sulky stove, and a town divided over a truth it did not want to carry. She had found Agnes Purdy and her plum preserves. She had found Rosa Hines and her careful geography. She had found a man who kept his word even when keeping it cost him, who had stayed on his own ground when leaving would have been easier, and who had been alone long enough to have forgotten what it felt like not to be. She went inside. She left the lantern burning.